Hey,
Hi,
how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fine. You got a slot.
I finally got a slot. I've been trying to get one forever.
I know you have. I know you have. So I saw you grab a slot. So, oh, good, he got a slot.
Yes,
It's always I get I obviously get requests beyond the slots, and it's like it's just always hard finding time. So
I understand
when the slots
completely.
work, the slots work.
That's right.
So you're on the Discord, and we've chatted before. I don't know how you want to use this. Just let me know.
Well, I think I could start with telling you kind of how I found you because a
Okay.
lot of things in my life were kind of coalescing. And
Okay.
then I have a few questions I'd like to ask you and just kind of pick your brain on if that works.
Perfect. Let's do that.
Okay, so kind of how I found you and just to kind of go through the process, two things really came together at once. I'm I've been the pastor of my church. I'm a pastor of a small independent Baptist church in the middle of the Colorado Rockies, First Baptist Church of Leadville, very similar in size to your church from what you've talked about. So,
Okay.
and I've been the pastor there about 2.5 years. We're congregational polity, and the previous pastor had to leave because of health reasons with his wife. They're in a much better situation now, but we're at a very high elevation, can be hard on people. And when he had to leave, the church was faced with a situation. Do we put together a pulpit committee? Or I had been serving and teaching Bible studies, kind of helping out here and there, still in the process of finishing my MDiv. So I wasn't quite done, but they just said, you know what, we're a small town and we really like what Tanner brings to the table. Let's put it to vote. And so they voted me in as the lead pastor. And so that happened 2.5 years ago. Now, around that time, maybe right before that, I was taking two classes in seminary. The first class I was taking was on discipleship and personal devotion and growth. And we had to read a book, and you referenced it many times, James K.A. Smith,
Yeah.
and You Are What You Love. And as I read through that book, I was just captivated by it. I'd never heard anything like that stuff before. And it was just really grabbing my attention. And I was like, wow, there is something to this real lived experience of Christianity. As he likes to put it, we're not brains on a stick meant
Right.
to, just download propositional truths and
Yep.
then, so I was really resonating with that. And then I took another class. It was an adjunct class with Carl Truman on sexuality, identity politics, and gender. And this, I didn't realize it at the time, but this was the class where he was vetting all of his ideas
For the book.
For the book. Exactly. So I'm sitting there doing the class with him, and that was opening my mind when he starts walking through how we got into this cultural moment, this situation. And so both of those ideas kind of nestled in my mind and just kind of sat back here. And the real takeaway between both of those was, let me see, if James K.A. Smith says that the things that I believe are almost secondary to the things I experience and live and feel.
Yep.
And then Carl Truman is telling me the way we got to our current cultural moment is we started to live and feel and experience different philosophical ideas down through the, generations. Maybe there's more to Christianity than just trying to smash information into people's brains on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
So that kind of nestled back here.
Yeah.
Then the next thing that happened for me is I became the pastor of our church.
Yep.
And COVID hit. I'd been a pastor 1 year and COVID hit. And now all of a sudden, you said this before, they don't teach you how to pastor in this situation, much less I've got 1 year's experience, period.
Yeah.
And when I first started my pastoral position, I started streaming. And what I was trying to do was have an open door policy where members of my congregation could come interact with me.
Yeah.
And I started out with office hours, and I quickly found out nobody came and visited me on my office hours.
Yeah.
And so I had a bright idea. It's because they don't want to go through the trouble of jumping in the car, driving 5 minutes across town. They don't want to do all that. I'll stream, and then they can come interact with me. Well, nobody came and interacted with me from my congregation, but I started having all sorts of randos, as you put it, come interact with me in my chat and start asking me a bunch of questions. And so now I'm in this realm where I'm streaming, and what I was doing is just my sermon preparation. I have Logos Bible software. I'd bring that up on screen, and I would just write my sermons, looking at books, commentaries, etc. And people would jump in and start asking questions. And I had a very specific
What
group
did you stream it on YouTube?
I did. Yes. If you look on my YouTube channel, my very earliest, probably 30 videos are me live streaming my sermon preparation. It's the worst quality ever. I've got like a little headset and I'm just, talking while I read books. That's it.
Really?
Yep.
I love that idea. That's a great idea.
Well, that's what I started with. And that, really my online presence to this day still includes that, right? I live stream while I prepare sermons and I just chat with people as they come in and talk. And it's gotten to the point where sometimes they help me prepare the sermons, which is pretty cool. So
that doesn't scale real easily though.
No,
if I would do that, I'd have a problem at this point.
Yes, you would.
But if I started doing that, that would have been cool. That's a cool idea. I like that idea.
Well, that's how I started. But again, it wasn't me thinking I'm gonna do this cool online ministry thing.
Right, I know.
It was just like I want to be available to my congregation, and then that's what it morphed into, right? So I still do that 3 to 4 days a week. I live stream, Logos Bible software pulled up. I'm working on sermons, and people pop in all the time. They ask for prayer. I pray for them. They ask questions. I try to answer their questions, and I have Logos right there because I'm working on my sermons. Sometimes somebody will ask a question. I just bring up a book or I bring up the Bible passage and I just read it to them right there, and we have conversations. So that's kind of what I do in the online sphere, I suppose.
I'm going to have to really think about that because I really like that idea because, and just as you say, I have zero surprise that your in real life church people do not participate. I mean, that gets into something that I'd like to explore further at some point, which is the relationship again between this digital world and the in real life world. There are real reasons people are hesitant. And it's not even just being online. It's the differences between in-person community and virtual community. But I love that idea. That was an awesome idea. Good for you. That was terrific. I got to check out some of those videos.
They're really bad. but
that's, I mean, and I make bad videos. I mean, that's the point of a lot of my channel is I don't want my videos to be too good. And as it stands right now, whereas to some degree, I don't have a big channel, but it's already too big for some things I'd love to do with it.
Yeah.
And okay, fair enough. The bigness offers me other opportunities, which we're enjoying right now because we might not be talking if you couldn't have found me. So fair enough. But I love that idea. That is such a cool idea because one of the things, I mean, both the strength and the hassle of the internet is, the speed of scalability. And you don't have that in real life. And that slowness of scalability is so helpful in real life because that slowness is how people actually live. There's someone recently, he made a comment that it was a YouTube video that, Jesus walked, it was a walking world, and the speed of walking is critical for understanding the Gospels. And that's a really fine point. But I love what you did. I'm going to check out some of those videos. That is so cool. I'm so tempted to do it, but I played around with that on the Discord server with my open studio, but I can't get anything done.
Yeah. And that's one of the struggles is sometimes I have to tell people, hey guys, I'm going to ignore chat for the next 15 minutes. I'm trying to nail down my proposition, and they can see it. They can see what I'm working on. But sometimes I get into such good conversations with people. Like, you're right. It's like, man, I've been doing this for 2 hours and I've made zero progress. So I'm going to have to, just look at chat every 15 minutes from now on, but it's a great discussion. And this is something I want to talk to you about as well. Maybe a little bit later or even now, but I've noticed that some of the people who show up regularly to my sermon preparation streams, I have a more frequent interaction with than some of the people in my local congregation.
Yep.
I'm lucky if I see some of the people in my local congregation 2 times a month.
Yep.
Much less I'm seeing these people 2 to 3 times a week, and they're bringing their regular daily prayers to me, asking me questions. I'm interacting with them, and it makes me wonder and makes me ask questions about, man, when it comes to platforms like you've talked about, how does the church need to adapt and adjust in this online age? And that's something I've constantly been wrestling with. And one of the things to me that's been most compelling about all of your content. So no, that's something I'm very, very interested in as well.
Yeah. And I feel that, I mean, again, most of my monologue videos and commentary videos to a degree too, it's just thinking out loud, because this question of platforms, it's so critical. And I just have the sense we know nothing. We know nothing.
Yep.
But yet we have to continue to move forward while we know nothing in order to learn. I mean, it's just there's no other way about it. And that's going to be a painful, it's going to be fruitful, painful, because we're going to learn, and we're human beings. We learn mostly from our mistakes. So, and especially we learn the most from the painful ones.
Exactly. Something I like to say all the time is we're building the plane while we fly it. And it really does feel that way.
Yeah.
And it's hard because there's Christianity has a rich tradition and a rich history. And yet there's a sense in which I agree with you 100%. We have no clue what we're doing right now.
No.
We have just been thrown. And I think that's true of the entire world, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody is trying to figure this out, and it behooves the church to try and figure it out.
Yeah.
And sometimes I see a mentality that says, no, we have our institution, we have our platform, we know what we're doing inside of this sphere, and we're just going to lock down inside of this sphere. And I can appreciate somebody having that understanding, but it's not my constitution, and I feel compelled to do something different, and that's what we're doing, I suppose.
Yeah. No, that's right. And boy, that's true. Oh, it's good. Yeah. So when you're doing your online sermon prep, I'm just gonna have to look at some of your videos to figure out exactly how you're doing. You're obviously showing your computer screen.
That's right.
And then you're voicing, and then people text chat.
That's right. They text chat me. So my computer screen is up there. I'm in the lower corner. My camera is in the lower corner. That's why I use a green screen. I have a green screen behind me so that I can be overlaid right on top. And then I actually have the text chat come into my OBS program so that I can see what everyone's typing. And then somebody will ask a question in text, type a prayer request in text, and then I look at the text every once in a while on my other screen, and then I respond to them. So I'm constantly going back and forth, engaging with my sermon on my primary screen, and then engaging with the chat on the other screen.
Are you ADHD?
Yes.
Yeah, I have to be to manage that.
Yeah.
Take that liability and turn it into a strength.
And it actually is a strength, because there will be many times where I sit down, I'm like, oh, I don't feel like working on my sermon right now. I don't feel like streaming right now. And then I'll do it because I have it scheduled, and the ADHD kicks in and the energy kicks in. And next thing you know, like 3 to 4 hours later, I'm like, oh man, we finished the sermon. I answered 100 questions. I prayed for a bunch of people. We're good to go. So it really is a strength. It's helped me to be more disciplined in my practice of sermon preparation week by week, so I'm not cramming on Saturdays.
I could never be a Saturday crammer. I learned that right off. I said, Saturdays are my day off. If it ain't done by Friday, it's going to be Sunday morning. And I almost always, now with the rough drafts for Sunday, most of the time, I got to have something by Friday because I got to make the video. So today, I've got Randos Wednesday morning usually. And then this afternoon will be, initial sermon spade work. Tomorrow will be draft work. Friday will be talk out the draft, and Sunday morning will be polishing and presentation. So that tends to be my schedule. So
got you.
What's your sermon schedule look like? How do you how do you craft it?
I started on Sunday evening, right? So yes, I've preached all day, but it's just read the text and start processing. That's all I do. So I have a stream Sunday evenings, and that's usually a very laid back stream. We're not going to be doing a lot of hard in-depth work. Usually I make a big pot of tea and we just kind of chill.
Are you married?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
And I have
your wife
son.
tolerates that, huh?
Yeah, yes, she does. We've got a lot going on. So we're
So you
pretty
start
busy.
Sunday night reading the text, and you're doing that online.
That's right. That's right. And I just start to process. I start to put together some big ideas,
Yeah.
and I think about it. I think about it Sunday evening when I go to sleep. Monday morning, I'm often thinking about it again. I stream again Monday night, so I process it again Monday. And then I take Tuesdays, Wednesdays off. And Tuesdays, Wednesdays are now my time to maybe do a little bit deeper commentary work that would be really non-compelling on a stream day and those sorts of things, right? So, yeah.
I can totally see that.
Yeah. So, but I want to continue with this because this actually feeds into how I found you. Is I started having people show up to my stream, and I'm Reformed. I love theology.
Yeah.
I go to a Presbyterian seminary, Reformed Theological Seminary.
Okay.
That's where my education is. I did that on purpose because I wanted to challenge my Baptist underpinnings. I'm still Baptist, but I'm Reformed Baptist, and I resonate very, very much with, Presbyterian school of thought. But I started having people come into my channel, and I think you'll understand this, and they were constantly prodding me with tests of orthodoxy. That's what I'll call them, tests of orthodoxy. So they come in and they say, now, what do you think about Joel Osteen? That guy's a heretic, right? And they were constantly poking me and prodding me, and I sensed in myself a hesitance to want to start naming names and condemning people. And you know what, I didn't know it at the time, but I watched your videos later. It has that Knights and Mooks dynamic.
Yes.
Which kingdom do you defend? Knight,
Yes.
Pastor Tanner, you're a new knight, we found. Which kingdom do you defend?
Yes.
And I was like, I don't know that I want to right now, and so I started having to mess with that. And then with COVID, now I have to find my own voice. Early on when COVID hit and the government of Colorado shut us down, I had to make a decision for my congregation.
Did you have any COVID in your little town up there in the mountains?
Very little, very, very little. Yeah, I think we had one case when many of the giant cities were overwhelmed. We had like one case. So, but we were responding to it.
Stupid.
I know, but we were responding to it in the exact same way that all of the major cities were, right? And I had a decision to make. And at the time, all of the major voices out there that I looked to for guidance and direction were silent. They were dead silent. And it was good for me because I finally had to adopt my own voice. Instead of standing up on Sunday morning and being a parrot through which John Piper is speaking, I had to adopt my own. Who is Pastor Tanner? Yeah. What does he stand for? And what are we going to do going forward? So I really wrestled with a sermon I titled Civil Disobedience in Christianity. And I landed on a topic that we are going to be obedient in this situation, long story short. And I had a congregation where 3/4 wanted us to defy the government, and a quarter wanted us to go way above and beyond in terms of shutting down, and we're never going to open for 7 years. And and so all of this was going on. But what it did for me is it made me find my own voice. And I found my own voice. And then I have all of these randos testing me with orthodoxy, and I had my own voice now, and I stood up to them and kind of pushed back. And they liked me because Tanner's Reformed. Tanner's got his theology straight. But they didn't like me because I seemed soft in certain areas.
Right.
I wasn't
what they would call soft. Right.
Exactly. And I just found this is where I'm at. And what ended up happening because of this is I increasingly felt more and more isolated and alone. I felt like I was an island to myself. I constantly told my wife during this period, I'm too conservative for the liberals and I'm too liberal for the conservatives.
Yeah. Know that feeling.
Yes. And it was so frustrating. And that is when I found your channel. And you had put out a video that essentially said something along the lines of why I started my channel. And you talked about the need to be honest and how churches weren't a place where you could be honest. And you were just laying your heart on the table. And I was resonating so much with it. And God used that during that time to just kind of revivify me, because I was like, there are other people out there who see this similarly to me. I'm not alone. You were speaking my language. You used the word in today's video, nuance. Oh, I love that word. I love that word, nuance. And I was just so resonating with that. And I was like, this guy gets it. He thinks the same way as me. And it was so needed for me at the time. And so that's kind of my story of how I came about, how I found you. And then you opened up my mind to a whole new world. So then I started watching Vervaeke and I started watching all this other stuff. And I was just like, people who are willing to have honest conversations, thinking out loud in public, and they're just okay with that. And these are my people. That's what it felt like.
Oh, good.
And that's how I found your channel. And that's why I'm so passionate about you and what you do.
Well, how did you find the channel initially? Through that honest conversation video?
So yes, but no, it was through Jordan Peterson. And here's an interesting thing in my story. Jordan Peterson doesn't factor that heavily into it.
Yeah.
I had heard of him. I had watched him here and there, and I had found in my stream, I had a lot of new atheist types coming in once in a while, right? And they just want to fight. And I thought, here's this Jordan Peterson talking to Sam Harris video, and I watched all 4 of them, and I was just like, I want to see how he approaches it, because I know he's not coming from the stereotypical, place I am, but a lot of people resonate with where he's coming from. Maybe he has some good ideas that I haven't thought of. And so I watched through the Peterson versus Harris stuff, and then one of your videos was recommended, and I clicked on it. I started to listen to it, and then I was like, I am resonating with this very much. And that's when I kind of searched through your videos and I found that video and I watched it. And that's the one that kind of opened my mind. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. Well, good for you. I mean, because there's way too many, I often have people say things to me like, well, you're the only pastor that's not a certain way. And I think, no, that's not true. That's not true at all, because most of my colleagues are not on the internet doing stuff. Right. You might find their sermons on the internet, but they're not talking to randos. And they're, to be a pastor is to know this game, which you just described, which is, I think, actually accentuated in the internet. We're talking about the speed of real life. Real life already has all of the trenches set up for these intramural warfares in Christianity. So you have your seminary, which is, already defined. And you mentioned, Carl Truman and Reformed Theological Seminary, right? You say those words, and because we know the playing field, it's like them. We know them, and we can make, even without spending almost any time, doing any research, we can make intelligible guesses with respect to their positions on various Christian hotspot issues. They're complementarian, they're egalitarian, they're affirming, they're hardliners, they're moderates. You learn that, but it's all very slow. And then once you show up on the internet, you're exactly right. It's the mooks and knights. Everybody's trying to figure out, you've got all these mooks out there looking for knights, and knights out there looking for mooks, and they're all finding each other, and they're all going and having, it's like Age of Empires on theology and everything else. Just all these little people running around killing each other. Just, it's Valhalla. Wake up and go to battle again. And for the most part, nothing happens. And we know that in real life, because again, the speed of in real life is much slower. And so for the most part, you have little defectors, and, you have deconstruction, which is basically defecting in certain ways to go over to other camps. But on the internet, it's all just kind of sped up and running around. And so, COVID comes around, and then, we're going to play mooks and knights with COVID. And so, and as a pastor, you very quickly realize, if you actually want to love and care for people, this makes no sense, because the majority of the people in your church, they're just trying to live and love Jesus and keep their family together. And, they're not playing that game at all. So they're just looking for some help.
Yes, exactly.
So, wow.
And so this kind of gets into maybe the first question I had for you. And it really goes along the lines of the video you posted this morning. You talked about the bright lines that are needed at times. Yeah. And so I'll frame the question the first way I wrote it up, but I kind of have some adjustments to it given today's video. So how can we engender more openness in Christians to create better conversation partners for other people out in the world to converse with? So on the one hand, I want other Christians to see this vision, right? This more openness vision where we can, not draw the lines as sharply. We can use more guidelines rather than rules. And so I want more Christians to be able to embrace that without completely, going progressive Christian. We're sacrificing the entirety of the scriptures, etc.
Yeah.
But I also, at the same time, and you pointed this out today, but I see the value of rule makers. I do see their value.
Yes.
I see what they bring to the table.
Right.
And so I don't necessarily want to convert everybody to some sort of guideline user. So I guess, what are your thoughts on the balance between those two dynamics? How can we because here's the other thing. If you're more open, you, I think, also have a tendency to be a little bit more open to the rule makers. But if you're a rule maker, you're not open at all. So you draw the line sharply and they stay sharp.
Right.
And so I guess I want two things. I want to create more guidelines users as far as Christians go, but I would also love the rule makers to become just a little bit more open. I'm okay with them still making rules and drawing bright lines, but I would like them to be a little bit more embracing of a more open perspective. So just your general thoughts on that. You touched on it a little bit today, but because this is really one of the primary things I'm wrestling with right now as I continue to engage with people online and I try to bring the gospel to the internet space.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think one of the first things to think about is that openness is a temperament, and temperaments themselves are multi-layered. There's a biological layer, there's a hereditary layer, there's a context, cultural layer. So you're going to have a distribution of high and low and openness in any population. And again, I think part of what the internet does is skew a lot of these dynamics and accentuates them, because the high and openness people can find each other and group up, and the low and openness people can find each other and group up.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be happening. I think in church, in real life, in the speed of locality, you're going to have a better shot, because in real life, high in openness has its strengths and liabilities. Low in openness has its strengths and liabilities. And in real life, in real community, there's going to be more of a understanding that, this person in church is very high in openness, and they're the first, they're the early adopter, and they're doing everything. And all of us know that that's person's that way, but we also trust them to a degree. So when they kind of step over the line, we'll wait until they step back, because they usually do later on. And the recalcitrant people also have their role to play in the natural dynamic of the community. And you're not going to get those same kind of dynamics on the internet, because it's different. So
yeah,
I think in a healthy church, part of the problem has also been that churches have been, especially in city areas, you've got a better chance of it because you're in a small town. But in a city area, you'll get more differentiation then. So you get certain kinds of high and openness people going to both Pentecostals and then to mainline. And low and openness people, you'll have both in deconstructionists, because they're just dismissive, and then, fundamentalists. So I think the real key is, again, facilitating the valuing of each other in a community, because that's where we can begin to recognize others and ourselves and learn to love them. And part of how we love them is we see their value. And so we let them be who they are. And in the midst of a real church, we work on that. And again, given the fact that you're in a small town and you have a small church, those are all advantages. Right. And they are seen as liabilities in the culture, but they are actually advantages in terms of discipleship for your people, because it's just not too easy to run off and find another church, because there just aren't a lot of them out there. And the few other ones that are there, they already know why they're not going there.
Yep.
So, I think, again, the patient pastoral work of doing it in community is what's helpful, because that's going to temper all of the people. And the openness, the high in openness people, because there's other value, won't, go run over the pail. And the low in openness people won't burrow in too deep, and because they still need each other. And with a little church, so much of a little church is just keeping the doggone thing running. And, that's, gosh, if I stop giving to the church, it's going to go under. So doggone, I'm going to keep giving to the church. And if I don't show up to the church, doggone it, the thing's going to close. And if it closes, I got to go to that church. I don't want to go to that church. So we're going to keep this one alive. So, and so I think you see the challenges, but I think the answer in real life is the normal work of ministry and discipleship in the church. Online, I think the best we can do is modeling. So I talked to Benjamin Boyce yesterday, and that'll come out at sometime soon, I'm sure. He's got the recording. But, he asked about bridges of meaning, and you had a chance to get to know that community a little bit.
Yeah.
Modeling is critical, I think, in an online screen-filled place, because and I think doing what I've done in terms of, in a lot of ways in my channel, as it sounds like on your channel, you had an idea and you did what came naturally. And I think what that means is even the diversity within you that you are unconscious of, you are going to be sending that out, and that is going to attract some similar people, and it is going to be reinforced, probably by virtue of the repetition, which can be high in this fast internet space.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, modeling will be key there, that if you are willing to talk to Unitarians and atheists and Buddhists and Muslims, and if you are willing, and how you talk to them, if, again, you immediately focus on the Mooks Knights, endless war, okay, that's who you are. But if you're saying, oh, those aren't, I have other values I have other values than those, that I am actually going to forefront by demonstrating patience and listening and care, and I'm going to value them as human beings above their tribal labels, that's a powerful thing to communicate. And I think that's, some of that got into Bridges of Meaning Discord and has been an element of this channel. So you're going to be tested on how open you are. There are going to be people who are critical of it, even people that you like, people who are friends, people that you trust. But, just as you had, when you had that moment, you got to be you, and stick to your guns and be you. And if someone else decides, you're a bridge too far for them, that's their decision. But don't let them bully you. You be you, and watch your conscience, and do it in prayer. And when you make a mistake, admit it. And when you do that kind of thing, that's just basic Christian discipleship. So
I appreciate that. A bit of an abstract follow-up you just reminded me of, and I think you talked about this in one of your videos, but I think I'm going to get the categories wrong. You said something like Protestants tend to manifest their differences in institutions themselves, whereas other Christian traditions tend to subsume them underneath the broader umbrella.
Yes.
Given everything you just said, do you think we as Protestants have, in a sense, set our denomination for failure in this situation, because we take those who are open and we create a church, and we take those who are low in openness and we create a church, and we tend to fragment so much that we just have little siloed communities that are grounded in our little subculture of Christianity. Like, I think about the work of Jonathan Pageau, and to me, Eastern Orthodoxy seems like ready to flourish, and I just look at different Protestant denominations, and I've got my toes in many different Protestant areas, and I just look at the massive hill we have to climb, and I think our work is cut out for us comparatively. So again, maybe a bit of an abstract follow-up, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, that's a good question. Protestantism is a function of urbanization, and it might not feel that way in your little town, but that's where and why it grew in many respects in Europe. And it's democracy grows out of it. It's part and parcel of all of this modernity. Now, I think as we're emerging from modernity, some of the benefits of some of the other traditions will emerge. And I suspect Roman Catholicism in the West adapted quite significantly to modernity in ways that Orthodoxy didn't. So that's going to give the Orthodox certain advantages. But I think some of that lack of adaptation is also going to present some of the biggest challenges for Orthodoxy as well. I mean, it's almost always the case that the strengths and weaknesses are on the other sides of the coin. So, these are very long, slow processes, and they're going to outlive you and I. I mean, Protestantism isn't about to die yet,
right?
But I don't know. I mean, Roman Catholics are more Protestant than they care to admit. And the more interaction I have with Roman Catholics, the more obvious that becomes. It's different, but they've been drinking from the same cultural fountains as we have.
Yeah.
What it's going to take for the Orthodox to adapt to this new world will also change them. And so it might be, it's sort of like, and certain people get really annoyed when I say this, it's sort of like the observation that Jordan Peterson is actually quite postmodern in many respects, because postmodernity is a very broad thing. It's nearly impossible not to be Protestant in the 21st century, from whatever tradition you're in. And, well, because Protestantism, like postmodernity, is a very broad thing.
Yeah.
And so I think, part of the deep connection between urbanization and Protestantism is, in fact, the question of how is diversity manifest within the church. And like I said, almost immediately when you have Protestants breaking off from each other, they're trying to figure out what is the church. And so right at the beginning, when Protestantism develops, Luther comes around with the idea of the invisible church. And what that invisibility affords is, as a Protestant, it's a little easier for me to look upon the Orthodox and the Roman Catholics as denominations. Technically speaking, they're not really. But because of the context, they can't help but be. So if you're Orthodox and you want to be really Orthodox, you really sort of have to look at Paul Vanderklay and say, he's not a Christian. Very few are willing to do that. And that shows their Protestantism.
Right.
You can find little Protestant groups. And so that dynamic you were talking about, all that testing, you'll find Protestants all over the place that will say, he baptizes babies, he's not a Christian.
Right.
They speak in tongues, they don't speak in tongues. If you don't speak in tongues, you're not a Christian. Protestants will play that game all day long with you. And the Catholics used to play it. And the Orthodox used to play it. That's why they excommunicated each other. But on this soil, at this time, put Jonathan Peugeot against the wall and say, your father, who's an evangelical, is he a Christian? I suspect Jonathan Peugeot will say, of course. So how Orthodox are you really? Well, I'd say he is, but that we have now framed Orthodoxy as a version of Christianity, and we have, in a sense, implicitly assumed the invisibility of the church because we don't have one frame anymore that contains it. And this conversation is going on fiercely within the Roman Catholic world right now. And so, yeah, we Protestants have our troubles, but everybody's got troubles. And so we're, and then along comes Tom Holland, and well, to what degree is Sam Harris a Christian? And it's Jordan Peterson that basically comes out and says, kind of, hey, you really sort of believe in God. It's like, and again, we're back at the Protestant game. So yeah. It's a good question.
No, I like that very much. No, it's really interesting. And I think that this is something I've been thinking along the lines of lately that's related. And I just want to maybe test the waters with you and see your thoughts. In the past, when lines of communication were much harder to come by, you could be, so for example, I'll go to a problem that happens in churches all the time, excommunication. It used to be, you had church discipline, you had, a covenant that you're going to sign with the church. And if you violate it, you can be excommunicated. We can practice church discipline. We can follow Jesus' rubric in Matthew. We're good to go. In the modern world, it's almost impossible to excommunicate anyone because of the fact that, just like you said, they can just go down to the church down the street. Now, a small town is somewhat shielded from this phenomenon, but especially in a large city, man, I've got 20 churches within driving distance to choose from. So what ends up happening is you kind of lose that dynamic of Christianity to be able to excommunicate. So now to blast this theme out a little bit more broadly, we used to be able to afford to draw hard lines in the sand. Watch out for those people over there. Don't go over there, etc., because they could just go down the street, and those were the only bad guys you had to worry about.
Right.
Nowadays, I can get done listening to one of your videos and then immediately be listening to something that's completely different. And now everybody is soaking up knowledge from all directions. And it strikes me that our old strategy of let's build our fences pretty soundly, let's protect the sheep by corralling them and making sure that the boundaries are clear, I think that strategy doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And I think now what we need to be doing is, instead of trying to build fences around our sheep, because there are way too many ways the wolves can get in now, I think we now need to train the sheep to defend themselves. And I think that partially happens through interacting and engaging with other ideas, not shutting them down and saying, don't go over there, they're heretics, don't go over there, they don't teach the gospel. Instead, let's bring all that information in and let's chew on it, let's wrestle with it, let's try to get some ideas about it so that we can all be better informed and better communicate with people who are outside of our camp. It seems to me that in an internet age, a communication era, that's the only option. Now, I do recognize I have the convenience of nuance. I live in a situation where I am able to play with gray areas and fuzzy boundaries and all that type of stuff. That may not work across the board, but I don't know. That's something I've been really trying to think about recently. And I would just be curious to hear how that bounces off of your ideas.
Well, it's analogous. So when I went to the Dominican Republic, check that off on bingo. Christian education was rote memorization. When my father was in a one-room schoolhouse in the prairies of the United States during the Great Depression, a little later, during the First World War, when he was in Second World War, when he was in grade school, a lot of rote memorization. Education in the 60s and 70s and 50s, actually before that, moved away from rote memorization. In the church, my parents' generation still, had their catechesis as memorizing questions and answers from the catechism. That was their catechesis. By the time the 60s and 70s came along, you had you had books in the Christian Reformed Church which invited discussion among the class with respect to, here's the question and answer from the catechism. What do you think about that? Oh, and then suddenly we're asking for opinions. And we sort of did that, you know, is it any wonder that people would read that? Oh, you want to know my opinion? I don't believe it at all. Well, wait a minute. What is this? And so then we get into, then very quickly the students in the catechism class learn, well, that's not the right answer. What they really want is for us to put the answer in our own words and still agree with it and subscribe to it. So what we did was we understood that it's a completely different approach to community and what we think human beings are. And so now, you know, in some ways you can look at my estuary idea and say, well, Paul is sort of taking that leap of catechesis from rote memorization and recitation to personal expression, and actually, you know, applying that into the main body of church. And fair enough, there's a lot of truth to that. But that gets into exactly what you noticed, which is that's going to make things a lot messier. And part of the reason we're doing that is because propaganda, as it arose in the early part of the 20th century, basically realized that now whereas before we sort of had churches and ministers and cultures, once the printing press came out, you had the beginning of propaganda. The 20th century came out, and now you can do it on radio and later on TV, and that's how you can mobilize large crowds through mass media, and you can propagandize them and say a lie enough and people will believe it. So we have no other choice than to, quote unquote, get people to think for themselves, when what we're really trying to do is likely instill in them far more sophisticated and nuanced patterns of belief, where they have a whole lot more questions and answers in them than the 52 Lord's Day of the Heidelberg Catechism had. So, you know, it's sort of been just a continual upping of the game. But that, in fact, does get to your previous question about the Protestant Reformation, because what you had, in a sense, in the Catholic pre-Reformational village was everyone's Catholic. Not all of them are going to church. Lots of them aren't going to confession. We're not really going to, you know, to what degree is the priest going to really track them down and tend to the sheep? You know, the Swiss Reformation, which gets played out in the Reformed tradition, go all the way to the Pilgrims and then the Puritans in New England. Now we're in charge. You know, we're going to have compulsory church attendance on Sundays. Okay, how's that going to go? So this game is continuing, and in some ways we're sort of reverting back to, well, we're all part of the West and we're all Christian. Even Sam Harris, whether he likes it or not, he's at least got a Christian value system, at least at heart, or that's the yardstick he's using to complain about Christians with. So in some ways, he's just sort of a new kind of bishop in denial. So yeah, you're right. You know, in some ways you have to weaponize the sheep, but you don't really have any other choice. But that then also brings you to, you know, there's a reason process theology developed when it did, because process theology basically, I mean, if after deism, after God number one sort of recedes, God number two is a thing. Well, once you have God being a thing, a being, and you live in a world where you recognize the power of process, and that doesn't really fit into your world of objects, well, very quickly, God isn't so much a being, now God is a process. And so you have process theology. But hey, wait a minute. There are processes and beings, and now we're sort of in the meta-divine realm. And, God is, in fact, God is not one creature, one being in the meta-divine realm, but in fact, there's God. And, then you get God number one, God number two, and all that stuff. So no, that you're recognizing the progression as it's taking place. And the internet is speeding all of this up. And so we are continuing to try to figure out how to adapt, and how the old narratives and categories and sheep pens relate to this world where it used to be the sheep, you put sheep in a pen so you can count them, so you can organize them, so you can protect them, so you can manage them, so you can feed them, because you have control over them because they're in a pen. And now what the internet does is destroys all the pens. And all right, now we're back out on the open range. Now you're going to need sheepdogs, and the sheep are going to have to know your voice. So no, you're right. You're right. I don't have an answer for you, but that's right.
That helps. No, that really helps. I'd like to pivot. I think it ties in a little bit, if that's okay.
Sure.
So C.S. Lewis, and you've got me reading C.S. Lewis now. God in the Dock. Now, those are a lot of individual essays,
Yep.
but he's got a couple essays in there, Reflections from a Tool Shed.
Yep.
And then he's got Myth Became Fact.
Yep.
Okay, so these ideas, because what we're talking about, we're on an open range now. And I think, if I can put it this way, and I'm dabbling in areas I'm somewhat ignorant of here, so please bear with me, but I feel like C.S. Lewis's epistemology might actually be a great aid to us in our now open range sphere. Now, C.S. Lewis had kind of two ideas. In Reflections from a Tool Shed, he said he was looking at a beam of light that was coming from a hole in the roof on the tool shed. And he said, it's one thing to look at that beam of light. It's quite another to step inside of the beam of light and look along it. Now I can see the trees and the sun behind it, right? And it strikes me that for a very long time, we've been looking at the beam of light in churches too. This isn't just a manifestation out in the secular society or in the world. We've been looking at the beam of light. And I think Lewis is calling us to look along the beam of light. Have you read Richard Cunningham's C.S. Lewis, Defender of the Faith?
No.
Okay, he talks about Lewis's epistemology, and he breaks down these two ideas. He said, for Lewis, reason is the organ of truth.
Yeah.
That's how Lewis put it. Reason is the organ of truth. I look at the beam of light. That is the analogous to reason, and that's how I discern truth. And then he said this. He said, imagination is the organ of, and I think this is striking, it's the organ of meaning. Imagination is the organ of meaning. And then, of course, I got Vervaeke meaning crisis things popping up in my head. So it seems to me like we've got a lock on reason, or we've been spending a lot of time focusing on that. As a result, a lot of truth has resulted. And we're in this meaning crisis. And for Lewis, the organ of meaning is imagination.
Yeah.
And as manifested in two things for Lewis, allegory and myth. Allegory and myth for Lewis is how you step into the light and you look along the light outside at the trees and the sun, rather than looking just at the light and trying to grasp it or understand it. And he talks at length about this myth that became a fact. In Christianity, we have this myth that brings the organ of meaning in, and now we can resonate with it. For Lewis, and again, I'm treading in areas I'm only just learning about here.
No, you're doing
but
good. Keep going.
Well, thank you. for myth, for Lewis, myth is more true than what I can perceive with my senses. They're like meta truths. You've talked about this, that story is a compression filter, whereby we take a world that is too large for us to understand and we compress it down into digestible bits. And I think Lewis has the same idea, that for him, mythology is that compression filter that we're utilizing to try and take all of these truths that are far too large for us and squash them down into something that's digestible and we can move with.
Right.
And so then I start thinking about that. And I'm like, man, and two thoughts come to mind. First, it seems to me that in our Protestant circles where we focus on doctrine and theology, and let me smash this information in your head, very anti-James K.A. Smith, that we've lost mythology. But then I look at the foundation of our religion and our faith and the whole thing. The Bible is, in Lewis's language and definition, pure mythology. And it's this myth that's become fact. So I guess my question for you is how can we re-mythologize Christianity and make the imagination come more alive? So because to me, that at least is a component of some of the meaning crisis we're suffering, even within the church. If we can revivify the imagination and re-mythologize the faith, perhaps, if Lewis is right in his epistemology, we can find some meaning that we have lost. That's a lot of stuff. What are your thoughts?
Oh, that's good. Well, so if you look at, so if you're if you're trained in, let's say, the Reformed tradition, you get a diet heavy in reformational teachings and mythologies, or reformational teachings and doctrines.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily too bad of a thing, because it's better that than too much teaching from the 18th and 19th centuries, which get almost to pure dogma and doctrine. And the reason it went that way was because that was the only way the church could sort of play at the table in a society that had already gone there. Okay. Now it's inverting again. And fortunately for us, we have, and even for Protestants, we still have the Bible. And, to hear Jonathan Pajot talk, one of the things he says, I've heard him say it a number of times. He said, he had to sort of come to all the symbolism and stuff late, but at least because he grew up evangelical, he knew the Bible stories. And Rod Dreher, another guy who went to orthodoxy, basically says the same thing, that at least the evangelicals, poke all you want to at sola scriptura, at least they got the Bible. that right. Placing it that high in the hierarchy at least kept the Bible in the game. So I went to seminary, and I because of going to seminary in the 80s, modernity was just starting to loosen its grip. So we got introduced to guys like Robert Alter, The Art of Biblical Narrative, and that was sort of the camel's nose, and then there's the art of biblical poetry, and very quickly we're not talking science, we're talking art. And so you get to preaching then, and of course I had to get my feet wet in preaching in a weird way, preaching in Spanish to Haitians in the Dominican Republic. And that's a whole nother story about what happened with preaching there. But then when you get back to North America, and then it's kind of like, well, okay, back to pull out some of these commentaries I used in seminary. And then, and I very quickly realized that so many commentaries were just so useless in terms of really preaching to regular people. And I should have had an indication of this, because my father, who of course was preaching to regular people, and my first bedroom as a boy was my father's study. And so here, some psychologists could make hay with this one. Here's my bed right next to this wall of books, and then his desk and his typewriter. That was my bedroom. It was it. I actually, lived in a preacher's study. That was my bedroom. I had a little bookshelf eventually that my one grandfather made for me. I could keep some of my things. Eventually I moved up into the attic. But anyway, but my father never had many of this. So I go to seminary and I'm learning exegesis and all this cool modern stuff and Greek and Hebrew and, all that stuff and source criticism and, all this stuff. And it's really cool. It's really wild. Then when you actually want to use it, it's like, this stuff is of limited utility in talking to regular people. So very quickly you realize, what is really helpful in talking to regular people? The Bible itself. And so and so my preaching style, which you can see is rather odd, because what I so often saw Protestant preachers do is turn wine into water. They would take this amazing story in the Bible and take one little verse out of it, and they would turn it into doctrine and beat everybody up with it for the course of the sermon. And I'd be like, you know what? The story itself is way more interesting than that little diving board you're using this one verse for to talk in abstraction to all of these people that are trying, God bless them, their hardest to try and memorize these abstractions. Just get the story into them. And so the point of the sermon should be to bring the story alive and try to connect it with the stories in people's lives, which again, it took a while to figure out what the job of pastor is, because in a modern frame, your job is to, cram all kinds of doctrine into people and, bully them and corral them to defend it and to be all these little, to do what the kind of people that are annoying you on the internet are doing. These are the products of our churches. And the reason I know that the Catholic and the Orthodox are Protestants too is because on the internet, they do the same thing. And I have very little interest in that game. And what I do have interest in is, to listen to Tom Holland talk to N.T. Wright on Unbelievable, and Tom Holland working through all these issues of belief and, all of the historical / all of the issues of modernity and Christianity, but then to hear him say, and you have these Christians and they don't read the Bible. The Bible's amazing. The Bible's amazing. I mean, he sees it. Yeah. Douglas Murray sees it. Jordan Peterson sees it. Then Jordan Peterson helps show a bunch of, Sam Harris devotees that the Bible is amazing. It's not this silly book from Iron Age mythology. It's because Sam Harris has been reading the Bible like a modernist. And Peterson comes out and says, gosh, what a horrible way to read that Bible. Why don't you read it this way and have some fun with it and learn something from it? And he finds congruence with, of all things, evolutionary psychology. So then all the Christians who've been taught to battle Darwin just pause and say, what? So, I think that, teach the people to love the Bible and love the story of the Bible and enjoy the poetry of the Bible. And, I've actually, now I've been preaching at this church over 20 years. And if someone were to analyze, what I've been preaching, they might say, for a Christian Reformed preacher, you've preached remarkably little Pauline epistles. And that doesn't mean that I have a problem with Pauline epistles. I have a problem with why Pauline epistles became the major diet for Protestant preaching. So, It became the major diet because the Pauline epistles were easy to use as proof texts for reformational dogma, which was the main point of the church. So that's why I do the weird things that I do. And, nobody's stopped me so far, and I'll probably do them until I stop preaching altogether. But I want the mythology is all there. Just let it out of the book.
I love
And that's what Peugeot is doing. I mean, his whole thing is letting it out of the book and connecting it to all sorts of fun medieval things. It doesn't mean that there's not stuff to still work out and questions to wrestle with, but people are just having fun again with it, and that should be celebrated.
I like that a lot. You talk about steady diet of Pauline epistles. It was the same thing in our church. We hadn't been outside of Paul for years, and I recently jumped into Ecclesiastes. And you talk about having fun. That'll blow all of your pre-formed categories out of the water, because there are times that Kohelet doesn't even sound like a Christian or a believer, right? Like, and it's been great. It's revivified the church, honestly, getting into that. Yeah. You reminded me of something when you were talking about that. I have had hammered into my head, grammatical, historical, hermeneutic, this is what you're going to do. And then, because I saw you reading it, Matthew Pajot's book. I love Pajot's view of the microcosms and macrocosms.
Yep.
And how things are true on multiple levels and layers of reality. Yep. It's true all the way up. It's true all the way down.
Yep.
I guess the question that I have on this is, how do I tap into that without being run out of my church as a heretic? Because that feels really foreign to people who have been on a steady diet of grammatic historical interpretation. And what I want to tell people is, no, that's true too. Like, just like you've said, just because the resurrection echoes throughout all of these levels of reality doesn't mean I disbelieve now in the literal resurrection. No, I'm there more than ever, but there's more to this than you guys have smashed it down into. And I want to expand it for people, but do so in a way that they're going to be able to receive.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, part of if we're, again, I've got all kinds of people from orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism yelling, "Oh, sola scriptura is the real problem." Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you what, I can use sola scriptura all day long with Protestants, and as long as you tie it to the Bible, most of them won't attack you too hard. It's right here. It's right here in the Bible. So, use that as a shield. And then just people remember three things from sermons. They remember illustrations, the stories. They remember the applications that are salient to their cultural moment. So if you say something about gays or masks or what women can and can't do, they'll remember that, because that's, because the context is weaponized, and everybody's looking for those weaponized things out there. And the third thing is how they felt during the sermon. That's what people remember from sermons. All this doctrine and dogma, that's way down the line in terms of what people pull. They're normal, regular people, and the ones that do pay attention to that, they'll become your elders probably. And so you'll have to manage that conversation. But so if you stick to the Bible, and if you're warm so they feel loved, and if you're not foolish with, all of the unexploded munition that's lying around in our culture war, and if you tell stories that actually fractal from the biblical stories, which is what sermon illustrations have always done, I don't think you'll have a problem. But watch out for those three. Make sure they know you love them. Watch out for the unexploded munition from the culture war. Don't make stupid errors with unexploded bombs. I see pastors do that. And it's like, did you really need to talk about that during that sermon? Because now you're going to spend weeks or months or years. You might have just derailed your ministry in that church because you said one careless thing about a culture war munitions piece. Just, when you do deal with the culture war, you're dealing with the culture war, and make sure you know what you're doing, because stupid errors on that, you're done. And it's unexploded munitions. That's what those are. And then the third one is use illustrations that illustration is symbolically resonant with this Bible story. You do that, you're fine in a Protestant church. There's still people.
No, I appreciate that. I've got a bunch more questions. I don't know when you need to land the plane.
Yeah, I should probably land the plane now.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Paul.
Well, we can talk again. This was terrific. I'm going to check out your sermon preparation videos. That to me just sounds let's see. Am I subscribed to your channel? Do you know that?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, text me the link to your YouTube channel right now. So it's in the chat.
Okay.
Just drop it in the chat so I can open it up in a browser and then subscribe so I can find you easy.
And I also do a lot of the sermon prep on Twitch. It's funny because when I started all of this,
that's what I wondered, if you use Twitch, because I haven't played with Twitch.
Yeah.
And I part of me is like, I'm always want to look at new frontiers, but it's like, no, I got enough on my plate. So I wanted to know if you did it on Twitch.
So I do. When I started it, I multi-streamed. I streamed to Twitch, Mixer, YouTube, and Facebook, all 4 platforms.
Really?
And I got the most engagement on Twitch. I got massive engagement on Twitch compared to all the other platforms.
Given to that.
That's exactly right.
And when I first, so when I, so I saw Jordan Peterson going, and I knew YouTube was incremental to it. And, I have, sons who play video games, and I knew what Twitch was. And I watched people watching other people play video games. I thought, oh, that's easy. YouTube.com, Pastor Tanner.
And I'll shoot you my Twitch link real quick as well.
That too.
Because that's what we do now. And this is, we've got a nice little format. I stream to Twitch, the full stream, and then we cut up the best bits and we make YouTube videos out of them, and then I post them to YouTube.
You have a helper?
I do have a helper. Yes.
Who's that?
I don't like to give away my secrets. No, it's actually somebody who found me on Twitch. Somebody who found me on Twitch came along and they said, "Hey, I love what you're doing." And they had a lot of background.
I can't complain. I got Rick. So
there you go.
And Rick's wonderful. And I couldn't do half the things I do without Rick. So I've always thought about doing something on Twitch, but I haven't gotten there.
There's a whole subculture and community of Christians on Twitch. And that's where a lot of this came out, because you have, again, all stripes, now all of them like video games. That's the common denominator between people who are hanging out on Twitch. But my stream is very, very different. Like I'm the only person on Twitch doing what I do, and it's because, well, of course, no pastors are on there doing their sermon prep. So that's really cool, because people who are interested in what I'm doing, that's all they love my channel, and they love hanging out and asking Bible questions. You know what's funny? I get a lot of pastors. A lot of pastors like to come out and hang out in my channel and chat with me and discuss. But then I also get a lot of aspiring pastors, people who like young kids, honestly, who are like, "Hey, I'm interested in going into ministry." So that's a lot of what I get. And so if you want to watch the full sermon prep streams, you should check out the Twitch channel. My YouTube channel, we have kind of morphed into, like I said, somebody will come in and ask about a question, and then I'll talk about it for 15 minutes, because all the thoughts in my head, and then, that'll be a nice little 15-minute YouTube video. And so we just cut it up and we throw it on YouTube, and so that's kind of how things have been back and forth. But primarily I do all the stuff on Twitch, and then, just post to YouTube to try and.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Capture those ideas.
Perfect sense. Oh, that's really cool. That's really cool. Oh, giving me ideas. Giving me ideas. You might not be the only pastor on Twitch soon. I
Hey,
love your idea of streaming your sermon prep. That is so cool. I mean, my rough draft is a little bit of that,
right.
but and I did that for some of the same reasons. I posted on Saturday, and then I look at the comments, and that helps me think about Sunday better. And so I call it a rough draft intentionally.
Yeah.
So, oh, this is cool. And you're certainly okay with, I will send you the video of this, and you can share it. You can share it before I do, as long as you don't wait too long. I get impatient. But and then and hopefully, some more people can find you. But that, then you're gonna have to figure out, I'll have to go over to Twitch and bother you while you're writing your sermons. I can't believe you start Sunday night. Oh, that'd be so hard.
Yeah, it just worked out the best. I streamed Sunday night, Monday night, Thursday night, Friday night, and that's just kind of my structure. When I first started, yes, I have one young son. He's 15 months.
Okay.
And I started out streaming every night of the week, and this all happened because of COVID. That's when I started streaming and doing all this stuff. And I streamed every night of the week for almost a year. And I kept telling my wife, you talk about that. I was like, this isn't gonna be forever, babe. She's like, it better not be.
Yeah.
So it's adapted and morphed over time. Yeah. But that's what we're doing now is I stream 4 nights a week, and I do sermon prep every time. And it's good because it gets me to the point where I basically have my sermons done. And then sometimes during the stream, like I'll do a little, I call them lessons or whatever. But so for example, some of the videos on my YouTube channel, I'd been reading Ian McGilchrist, and I saw some overlap between what he was talking about and maybe apologetics or something. And so then I just did a little video like, hey, I've got Audible. Let me play the audio from Ian McGilchrist, and then let me, interact with it a little bit. And so we do those sometimes too when I do my streams. So sometimes I'll come in with like a pre-prepared lesson that's usually 30 minutes to an hour. I'll teach that, and then I'll spend the rest of the time doing sermon prep. So that's kind of what I do. And again, it's that consistency. You get the same people show up over and over, and some people will disappear for, a month or two, and then they'll come back. Hey, how you been? I had a lot going on. So I don't know. It's really, really interesting. I'm going to keep doing it. It helps me finish my sermons, but it also helps me to build community. So
that's so cool. That's wonderful. I'm so glad. I'm so glad you got a slot. So now I've got a much bigger view of what's going on, and it's really cool. Good for you. Good for you, man. Yeah. This is a pandemic comes, and you never know what the good things God's going to bring through it. So
amen to that. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. So no, I appreciate it. And I've been really broadening my horizons recently, and I don't feel so alone. And I just, I feel like I'm advancing my own thoughts and ideas, and it's really invigorating. It's really encouraging. And yeah, I just appreciate everything you do so much. So thank you for taking the time to talk with me. Honestly, I was so excited when I got a slot. I know I had messaged you and was like, yes, I did it.
I know. I was just talking to the guy before you, whose video I won't share publicly, but it's like now we're gonna have the protocol of the story when where were you when you got your Randos slot? And
well, send me the video, I guess, and then
I'll do that.
When were you planning on posting this one? I don't wait too long either. So
you can post it immediately if you want to. I usually post in the morning, so I don't know if I'll have time to. I want to follow up the one I posted today with some commentary on Andrew Clavin, but I've got to do some sermon prep. And my friend here is putting in a mail slot, so that because our mailbox got stolen at church. Local small church pastor, this. I was like, oh crap, they stole my mailbox. I was like, oh. Now we're putting in a mail slot. Try and steal that, buddy.
There you go. Exactly. Wow. That's funny.
So anyway, and yesterday I had all sorts of homeless work to do with one of my homeless guys, and got him in the hospital. And so, it's just, you understand the life of a pastor. You just, I got a clogged toilet. Oh, we gotta, I gotta cut the grass. It's a million things. So
exactly.
Well, so good to talk to you. And I will, once Zoom finishes doing this thing, I will post it to YouTube, and I will send you the link.
Okay.
And then you can download it from YouTube, and you can go ahead and post it right away. And it'll probably be a day or two before I share it. So.
Okay, perfect.
Good.
Thank you so much, Paul. This was so encouraging. I appreciate you so much.
Okay, take care.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
you too.